My oldest memory of being specifically different from my peers probably dates to about kindergarten or first grade in the early 90s. It was that late fall, early winter time of the school year where you're close to winter break. So the teachers just have the kids focus on Christmas related arts and crafts. Somewhere in between the handmade cards, popsicle stick ornaments, and learning how to make a snowflake by folding paper and attacking it with scissors, I found myself in the front of the classroom trying to explain Hanukkah to my classmates. Now, this isn't a memory per se. It's hard to relay specific memories when one has a neurological condition. That means you don't really have autobiographical memories, just the stories you've told yourself and others over and over for your whole life. But I'm sure I talked about how the Jews couldn't practice their religion, something about dreidels and latkes, used the phrase festival of lights, and managed to convey something about the miracle of the oil that was only supposed to last for one night, lasting 8 instead. But the important thing that remained seared into my brain was that I distinctly remember feeling uncomfortable and put on the spot and a little put out that I was teaching the class when there was someone right there whose job it actually was. I've always had issues with authority. I wasn't even the only Jewish kid in my class, so I don't know why the duty fell to me. Maybe the name Greenberg rendered me the most unambiguously Jewish, and in retrospect there was probably a certain amount of mixed religion family-related politics involved too. As I grew older and started spending afternoons in Hebrew school, while my non-Jewish friends had sports or other after-school activities, or just more time for homework, I recall being jealous of their free time. Why did I have to sit in a classroom with a bunch of kids I didn't know to learn prayers by rote and history that seemed to contradict what I learned in school? At some point, ideas about the value of preserving culture and respecting family history made me a little more willing, and of course the H word came into play. But for a long time, all I knew is that I was different, and that meant extra work. So, when I was introduced to the idea of a Jewish summer camp by a friend, I insisted I had to go too. I was looking forward to a sense of camaraderie and belonging I felt was lacking. I went to a Jewish Zionist socialist sleepaway camp for something like 6 years, where I had to fake understanding Hebrew to be able to follow the announcements on the PA, and where my willingness to turn on light switches on Shabbat made me weirdly popular. In a way. I never fit in there either. I was one of the only kids who didn't go to a Jewish day school, and a giant nerd to boot. To the extent that I have any specific memories of my time there, they're pretty terrible. Lonely. This was another 6 summers of finding myself in situations where I felt very much on the outside, this time because I wasn't Jewish enough. My last falling out with organized Judaism came after my bat mitzvah, as the focus of synagogue-centric activities switched from prepping for B'nai Mitzvah to trying to convince the handful of us to pair up heterosexually 2 by 2 and go on to cook Jewish food and make Jewish babies. As a feminist and a queer person, this was not going to fly. I skipped out on my Birthright Israel trip, in part because of this same sort of attitude, and even when I went to college and was exposed to the world outside the conservadox shul where I grew up, there was still such a strong emphasis to meet someone beyond everything else. So I left. Even in my adult life, I find my relationship with Judaism to be complicated sometimes. I don't observe in all of the ways I did growing up, but Hanukkah has stayed with me. I still know the story of the Maccabees, and at some point realized that potato latkes don't make any historical sense to my never-ending amusement. I still celebrate that the Jews triumphed over adversity. I still believe those stories are important to remember and retell. But if somehow I could reach back in time and stand in front of those kindergartners again, part of me wishes I could tell them, yes, Hanukkah is about the temple and the miracle and what happened years and years ago, but as I've celebrated it, it's been about coming together and being happy that I have friends to commiserate with about how much winter sucks. And in case you haven't noticed, this winter, this whole shit show of a year, has sucked. I've come back to liturgical Judaism a little bit during lockdown, celebrating a very me-specific version of Shabbat as an escape from all the bullshit going on in the wider world. On the best days, I can look at my history of feeling isolated, even in organized Jewish spaces, as something that helped me learn to cultivate empathy, an ironic personal microcosm of the history of the Jewish people wandering in the desert in search of the promised land. I wish I could tie a nice little bow on my experience, but it just wouldn't be true. I still struggle with my relationship with Judaism, and I don't have a nice, neat answer for what I wish I knew back then, what I wish I could have told myself or my kindergarten class. I still struggle, but I still light the Hanukkah candles. If I were a different sort of person, maybe I would say that as I light each candle, I feel the fiery spirit of my ancestors who endured the persecution of Antiochus. Maybe I'll be that sort of person someday, who knows. But this year especially, I was just grateful to make it through one more year, which is one of the traditional blessings said at many Jewish milestones throughout the year, including the first night of Hanukkah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of all, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this season. And maybe this time, that's enough.